All right, well, we are live here at Voices United, and we just want to welcome everyone watching, whether you're watching this today or in the days to come. We thank you so much for being part of moving this conference online and coming to this last session time of the day. Without further ado, we are so lucky today to have Caron Daley with us from Duquesne University. Caron is Director of Choral Activities and Ensembles Coordinator at the Mary Pappard School of Music at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, PA, where she conducts the Voices of Spirit and Pappard Chorale and teaches undergraduate and graduate conducting. Caron is a certified Dahlkreuz rhythmics teacher and frequently lectures on the sound gesture relationship in choral conducting. And again, we are so lucky to have you here today. And here's your presentation.
Thank you, Max. Great to be here, everyone. Can't wait to discuss this topic with you. It's a topic I've been thinking about for a long time, and it's really animated my choral practice and helped me to be inspired. And so I hope it can be inspirational for you in this COVID-19 time. I think we're all looking for new ways to connect with our communities of singers. And I'm hopeful that this presentation will also be applicable and to our current situation. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen with you. All right. So the title of today's session is the Embodied Rehearsal. And in a way, it's funny to talk about embodiment online, but perhaps this topic has become even more important as we think about being apart from one another. What does that mean for learning to sing? And today we're going to talk about engaging singers in kinesthetic learning. If you'd like to follow up with me after today's session, please feel free. My email is there, and I'm happy to discuss topics with you further, to chat about anything that we've discussed today. Also, you can feel free to put questions in the chat box, and I will be monitoring that as we go along. So, in addition to the abstract, which I'm sure that you've read, I'm hoping we're going to touch on some of these questions today. And these are questions that I often encounter, and I think they're really important for us to kind of look at it from this perspective. I know movement-based teaching works, but I'm not sure how to use it. And that's kind of curious in a way, because we're movers as conductors, and we use movement all the time. But when it comes to translating that into helping others learn, what do we do? How do we use it? I often hear, my choral room is too small for movement. Help! Or I have risers or chairs that are in the way. How can I work with my physical space to integrate movement? What types of movement activities work best for different age groups, different populations? So we know young children love to move and will be willing to try this, but what about teenagers? What about adults? And what if I have choristers in my choir who have mobility concerns? How do I think about movement in those different ways? And then, perhaps most apropos for today, how do I integrate movement in the COVID era, with distancing protocols in place and potentially online rehearsals? Well, I'd like us to begin with this premise that singers participate in choirs to feed their body, their mind, and their soul, their souls. And I think more than ever, we're thinking about choral singing from a holistic perspective. Embodied pedagogies have become increasingly valued as we think about it in this way, to help us to deliver holistic and inclusive choral instruction. So let's do a little poll, and if you would just sort of pop your hand up, not that I can see, but this is part of doing an embodied session that we kind of integrate the body. So have you sung with a conductor that used movement? Do you use movement in your choral rehearsals? Do you use movement in your own choral preparation of the score, your own conducting practice? Maybe. What is embodied pedagogy? Maybe you've heard that phrase before, or maybe you've heard kinesthetic teaching or movement-based learning. All these, what does this really mean? And I really love this definition here. Learning that joins body and mind in a physical and mental act of knowledge construction. So joining the physical and the mental, body and mind. What are some of the hallmarks of an embodied pedagogy? Well, again, this notion of holistic knowledge construction, of learning through the body and integration of the various parts of the body. The implication here is also the socialized part of learning, the social contextualization and the interpersonal engagement. So not only my body, but how does my body interact with your body? And that's a really important question for us as we think about teaching online. We know that a lot of the parts of choral singing are missing, not just the group aspect of it, but other embodied things like the smell of the choral room, or the way you feel when you're around other people, standing on a riser, hearing other voice parts around you. A lot of those things are part of embodied teaching, and choral singing is naturally an embodied experience. Embodied learning, teaching, and learning has been used in a variety of disciplines. We can read in the literature about its usage in things like mathematics education, language learning or foreign language learning, speech language pathology. And my current research is with a speech language pathologist, and we're thinking about how to use gesture to teach foreign language sounds for singing. And so other fields are using embodied teaching and learning. And we know that it improves engagement in learners, that it improves efficiency in learning and retention of learning. So something that is learned through the body will be more easily recalled for the learner. And we know that it reduces cognitive load. And I think, again, that's something that's really important for today as we think about all the amazing things that are on our minds right now and the complexity of our teaching and learning situations this fall. How can we reduce cognitive load for students? All right, well, what is embodiment? This is a word that we hear a lot. And I like this definition here. It's an integration of the physical and the biological body, and the phenomenological and experiential body. So let's try something together. And we'll do several things today that are sort of more practically oriented so that we can try moving. And again, I'm sorry that I can't see all of you, but I invite you to move in your living room or bedroom, wherever you are today. So make up a short gesture for your name. And it's really important that you say your name at the same time. So I'm going to do mine here, and I'll just use my first name, and here's my gesture. Caron. I'll try that again. Caron. So go for it. I invite you. Make up a gesture. Don't think about it too hard. Say your name and do the gesture at the same time. Cool. And if we were all together, we could see these and we could compare. But one of the things you notice about my gesture, for example, is that Caron starts with a percussive sound, and my gesture has sort of a percussive beginning, and then I sort of faded the gesture. So Caron. And the sound naturally made a diminuendo. So it's amazing to me how when we use movement and sound together, that these two things will naturally be connected to one another. Sometimes we don't have to work all that hard for that connection. It's just right there. And we can use that connection as we teach. And we're going to talk much more about that. So remember your gesture, everyone. I'm sure I'm going to ask you at the end of the session if you remember it. And I imagine it will be right there for you. So what does this look like in choral music? So we know embodied pedagogy is used in a range of disciplines. What does it mean in choral music, and where do we see it? So I would say that we start to see an interest in embodied pedagogy starting in the 1980s. Even though many of these techniques are centuries old, millennia old, we see a lot in the literature about Alexander technique and about body mapping, which sort of grew out of Alexander technique. We hear a lot about Le Bon movement analysis, and in particular, the 8 efforts that we hear about. We hear about Dalcroze eurythmics, the Feldenkrais method, Tai Chi, Qigong, and dance-inspired movement in a choral rehearsal, certainly too. So there are a lot of entry points here. Today, I want to focus on Dalcroze eurythmics, and I'm certain lots of you have heard of Dalcroze. Most often, it's used in reference to elementary education or early childhood education, although it was not first designed for that purpose. Emile Jacques Dalcroze developed it working with collegiate students, with adults. So it's interesting to think about that too. But this is a century-old approach to music education that views the human body as the instrument of musical perception and performance. And certainly in singing and in conducting, we know a lot about the body as the instrument, because that's it. We are the instrument. And in many ways, that's why these embodied pedagogies make so much sense for our discipline. Who was Emile Jacques Dalcroze? He was a professor of music theory and a conductor. And I find this fascinating that some of his ideas came out of his early experiences as a conductor. It's a music-based movement approach, and in some ways that distinguishes it from the others that you see at the top of your page there. It was first developed and designed for musicians. So it is exploring music through movement, and that's an important distinction. In fact, it's a comprehensive approach to music education with 3 major areas: eurythmics, solfège, and improvisation. So if you'd like to learn more about Dalcroze, there is a whole approach to solfège, which is really fascinating, using fixed do and piano improvisation, movement improvisation, but most people focus on the eurythmics aspect of it. All right, let's get practical again. We see it referenced in the literature since the 1980s, as I mentioned, and most often in reference to vocal technique, musicianship skill development, and interpretation of repertoire. So let's pull each one of these ones apart for a moment. Vocal technique. Well, we often see, or maybe you've experienced, some type of a gesture used with a sound. And that could be a sigh or a siren or something like, whee, with a gesture that goes with it. So let's all try that together. Here we go. Whee! Sure. And so we're kind of giving students access to their voice by using a movement that looks and feels to them like their voice, like the air, like the energy of the sound coming out of the body. And this is really useful because, you know, the vocal mechanism it's very difficult to see unless you've got a scope or some way to see it. And so helping students to develop feeling for sound is a really important application of Dalcroze. What about musicianship skills? How can we use movement to develop hearing? And this idea of the whole body is hearing, singing, feeling, moving, all interconnected. Well, here's an exercise I love to do, and I'm going to stand up to do this so that you can see my gestures just a little bit better here. So we're going to sing a chromatic scale together. I hope you can still hear me, starting on C and going up to C and back down again. And actually I'll mirror. So this is low C and this is high C here. And we'll sing sharps as we ascend and flats as we descend. And we're thinking about playing what I like to call the teddy bear piano. And so this is a large scale piano that has the white notes here, or the white notes kind of right beside your body, and the black notes further away from your body. You can imagine a giant keyboard here. The great thing about the teddy bear piano is you can't hit a wrong note, and I think I love that about movement in the sense that we're making things concrete, but we're not actually playing that instrument. So there's some freedom there for us as we move. So we're going to sing ascending in sharps, playing the teddy bear piano as we go. Here is a C for us. So C, C sharp, D, D sharp, like that. All right. So sing along with me, please. Here's C. C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C. Coming down. C, B, B flat, A, E flat, G, si. I went a little bit sharp, sorry about that. This is a lot of fun for students to try. And as you do it, you sort of really get to measure out the feel of these half steps. You can do so in contrary motion with one group coming down, one group going up. A lot of fun to integrate this kind of thing as you sing different excerpts and different examples. Cool, I'm gonna sit back down again. The interpretation of repertoire, this is another way that we see Dalcroze used, and that could be something like interpreting the score through movement. So let's say it's something polyphonic. Maybe you'll have the sopranos walk out into space as they do their entrance, and then the basses come from another side of the room or interact with the sopranos in some way because they have a duet in the music, and then the altos and the tenors, something like that. It could also be, you know, working on something in the music by using movement. So something like developing a sense of phrase, not breathing through the whole phrase, or changing the articulation of something by using some type of a gesture to shore up the approach to articulation. So these are the three main categories that we see written about and used in choral practice. So let's go back to this idea again of the whole body. The whole body is inclusive of moving. We think about moving first, but moving activates hearing, and hearing and movement have this beautiful interrelationship. And singing can be used at the same time. This activates feeling for people. Oh, you know, I think I have an idea about the music I didn't have before. What if instead of the sopranos walking out this way, we tried walking out this way? You know, so singers are sort of developing a firsthand knowledge of the music as they experiment with movement. And this, of course, impacting thinking. Oh, I think we could add this particular articulation here. It's an experiential and an experimental approach to the score in a way that invites people into the process more deeply. And I love to ask students, what is the instrument of singing? How do you think about it? And if we were live, I would toss this question out to you. Is it the vocal folds? Is it the torso? Is it my lungs? Is it my hearing? Is it my ears? What about the role my eyes play? And what about my feet? And sometimes there's, you know, someone who says, you know, feet. And it's like, yes, the feet are absolutely a part of the whole body. And then maybe someone would say something like, my experiences or my imagination, something like that could easily be part of the whole body too. And what we're awakening for students, I hope, is the sense of the somatic. And that's the interior perspective of the body, how it feels inside me. And that's an important part of embodiment. And as we seek to awaken that in students, then of course we're celebrating the uniquenesses of the various people in the choir, you know, and that your perspective will feel differently than your perspective. And we are inviting that into our practice. So there's my question. How can we invite the whole person into the choral rehearsal? So let's try a few more movement things here because it's so much fun to experiment with this and see how it feels. And I'm going to stand again and we'll sing a scale going up and going down. This time we'll step the beat. And this is a very common Dalcroze practice, to step or walk while singing. And so here again is that C. We'll sing do, re, mi, up to do and back down, and we'll use step on each of the notes. Here we go. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Good. To me, that feels great. Gets me a little out of breath sometimes, but I feel, you know, really connected to the singing. Let's add a dimension here, and this would be a very Dalcrozian step to add. if we're singing a whole step or a whole tone, let's make a larger step. And if you're singing a half step, let's do something smaller. And I've got their whole tones and semitones. I'm Canadian, so I'm giving myself away there. But again, whole steps in the music with a larger step, half step with a smaller step. And now you could do this through space. I'm going to do it in place so that I stay with you here. But you certainly could do this across your room and back. That way you're really measuring out distances as you go. So let's sing that scale again. Pardon me. There's C. Here we go. And do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Great job. I would often follow this type of an experience with a question. How does that feel to you? And I wish that we could share those experiences now. Maybe we can share them a little bit later. But how does that feel to you in your body as you sang those whole steps and half steps? Did it change when you integrated stepping? I see a couple questions in the chat here, so I'm just going to take a quick peek. Oh, great. Yeah. So the question is about a limited range of movement and motion, and that's something we can talk about too. Absolutely. Let me just move my chat over here. Great. So let's approach that for a second. And certainly we want to be cognizant and aware of people who have different mobility concerns. A lot of movement things can be done in place and don't require large scale movement. In fact, as I think about my semester, I'll be teaching in person with a high flex model, and my students will be spaced apart. Well, we are not going to have the luxury to do circles and lines and things like that. Large scale movement is going to be basically off the table. So I'm going to be using movement and motion with them that can be done in their standing space, in their seated space. And those are absolutely things that you can adapt. Any movement that you do large scale, like we just did stepping of a scale back and forth, you could do small scale. It could be something like do, re, mi, fa, sol, with hand gestures, for example. And the other little caveat I'll say there is movement is always an invited experience. We don't want to impose movement or say, let's all do this exact same gesture right now. It needs to be modulated through each person. And so that's an important consideration. Thank you. All right, let's go forward to think about, we thought about embodiment and what that means. The other word we hear a lot is entrainment. And this is used again in various disciplines. Often enough, we hear it in the realm of music therapy. But entrainment means coordination or synchronization of two motor systems. And this is you going for your run and listening to, something that's like 120, 144 beats per minute, something quick to get your heart pumping, get your feet moving, and you sync up your running with the music. And that is an example of entrainment. Well, when two motor systems are interconnected, it amplifies and it integrates learning, basically. It's something that we want to strive for as we teach. And this applies to the Dalcroze concept of a rhythm and your rhythm. And you'll see these words in the Dalcroze world. What does a rhythm mean? It means when two systems are not coordinated. And we could think about this in a lot of ways. It could be when the vocal mechanism is not coordinated with the idea. And this particular system and this system are not in sync, for example. So it could be a technical problem in a certain way. A rhythm could be a technical challenge. Or it could be something like stepping to the music and just, can I step in time to the music? It's actually, it can be very challenging. If let's say it's a slow tempo, how do I measure my movements so I'm stepping as slow as this music? How much balance does that take for my body? And we counterpoint a rhythm with your rhythm, and of course, eurythmics, it's in there. Your rhythm being a synchronization or a coordination of music and movement, or sound and gesture. These two motor systems, how they connect. So that being our goal, of course, of all this is to develop eurythmy, so a sense of connection between singing and movement. So let's try this particular piece of music here, and very inspirational for us this morning. We were on an ACDA call, and now I'm dropping the name of our executive director. Isn't that terrible? Someone will chat it to me, I'm sure. He was talking about how can I keep from singing. Tim Sharp, thank you so much. Tim Sharp was talking about the first verse of this piece and how that's become a sort of a hymn for him as he thinks about COVID tide and all of the challenges we face right now. So it's a beautiful piece of music. Okay, so let's try something. This is going to demonstrate entrainment for us. Maybe you do this in your choral rehearsals. Do you invite singers to tap on the sternum as they sing? I love this motion, and in Dalcroze, we're very concerned with the quality of the gesture. So if I turn sideways here, you can see how this has like a circular quality to it, because movement is always in motion. So tap on your sternum, and I love this. It's close to the voice, unlike the toe tapping, which is far away from the voice. Let's sing How Can I Keep From Singing? I'll just give you the starting pitch, and then I invite you to just go ahead. You can sing any part you like, but will you tap on your sternum as you sing? And then we'll have a little discussion about it. So I'll count us in. Here's first D pitch. So I'll count us in half notes, and will you tap and sing? 1 and 2 and. All right, I'm going to guess that we're mostly at the end by then. What were you tapping? What note value were you tapping? For some of us, maybe it was the half note, my life flows on. Perhaps it was the quarter note, my life flows on in endless song, or sort of the primary subdivision. Both of those are excellent choices. What we might do is just invite singers to tap, as I did, and see what comes out. Again, this is good, now a way to use movement as assessment in a way to see what singers are hearing as they move. All right, so perhaps most people chose half note. You could use quarter note to have them feel that subdivision. We could do it again and everyone could tap quarter note, for example. Or if the rhythm was a little bit less stable, again, the primary subdivision would be a helpful way to move forward. So we're receiving the movement from the ensemble, observing, assessing, and then using movement to change the sound. So I have this statement here, change the movement to change the sound. Most people chose half note, there we go. Change the movement to change the sound. So let's say that this lacked a little bit of shape, for example. We could do something that would have a gesture that has, again with the half note, but has more sense of travel. My life flows on in endless song, for example, and that would invite even more forward motion into the music. Or perhaps it was truly just a matter of bringing the ensemble into rhythmic unity. You could choose something like a snap because it has an auditory element to it. And when you do a snap, it has this sense of release of energy, and that helps your voice and your words to be on time. It could be something like that. Or certainly you could go after phrasing if rhythm was stable. You know, it could be something like painting the phrase. I love that phrase. Let's paint the phrase. And that could be to show where we breathe here. It could also be to show pitch. My life flows on in endless song. lover's lamentation. If you're working on defining in singers' hearing what the pitches are, you could use a gesture that would really make that concrete. So all to say, I think we have a lot of options when it comes to using movement. No one movement is particularly the right one. It's more, what are you after as a conductor? Where would you like to take your choir next? Can you use movement to do that? In my experience of using Dalcros for about 20 years now, it invites a sense of play and improvisation into a rehearsal. And to me, that is so essential. I love to use this term dynamic learning environment. So that students, walk into a rehearsal and are just not sure exactly what might happen that day or what discoveries we might have with the music that day. So here are a couple ideas for you. I invite you to use movement throughout the rehearsal. I think we often see it in a warm-up setting, and it absolutely should be in a warm-up setting to kind of, waken the body and invite it into the rehearsal. Can you use it throughout the rehearsal? And that could be something as simple as taking a little stretch break. That's something we could do right now in this session. Like, oh, we've been sitting here. Let's just take 30 seconds to move and reconnect with the instrument. It certainly could be something in the rehearsal of repertoire, or to pause to focus on a specific technical detail throughout a rehearsal. Solve problems in the repertoire using movement. Alternating configurations of singers. Again, we may be challenged to accomplish this semester. Large circles, small circles, concentric circles. I love to use concentric circles. Maybe certain voice parts in the interior circle, inner voice parts, outer voice parts in the outer circle, things like that. Lines, partners, trios, stepping in space. One thing about stepping in space that is so powerful, if you've had that experience, is that as you walk by other singers, you hear other parts. Oh, is that what the tenors are doing? Oh, I never noticed the basses on that low note before. And this invites our singers to know the entire score. And to me, that is an essential piece of the Dalcros puzzle. How can I ask and invite students to learn the entire score, to have an experience of this whole music? And often enough, when you stand in the alto section, you hear altos, and you might not have a sense of what others are doing. So I've noticed that singers really report this is powerful, to walk by others as they sing. And the other point here is to invite singers to move and gesture while they sing. This takes some doing. Often people ask, how do I introduce this? I haven't been using movement before. I'm worried that maybe students will not want to do this or find this odd in some way. So I think little by little, you do something small, or you do your name as a gesture, and you start to use the language of gesture more often and movement in a rehearsal. And what ends up happening in my experience is that singers then begin to move on their own. I used to have a student who just, for some reason, he loved to tap the beat on his shoulder, and that was great. It was fantastic. I could always count on him to be doing this while he was singing. But I invite that, and that does not mean that we're going to do it in performance, of course, unless we want to do choreography in a performance, but that we will be free to do that as we learn, as we try to embody the music. Well, let's think about online rehearsals and hybrid rehearsals. In many ways, let's speak about online for a second. This is even more essential because we have taken away a lot of the aspects of embodiment that singers are used to having. So can you use gestures and movements to build community? At the beginning of your rehearsal, for example, you could do something like, how is everyone? Let's do it right now. 5 is fantastic. 1 is not so great. So everyone, show us, how are you doing today? And you can quickly get a sense of how people are doing. Or it could be something silly like, I saw this one the other day in a workshop I was attending. Lean forward if you got more than 8 hours of sleep. lean backward if you got less than 8 hours of sleep last night. You know, just sort of awakening the physical response, and then us having a sense of collectiveness because we're all doing a gesture together. Things like that can be really fun. Certainly, I think we need movement more than ever to teach technique and to help singers to feel something. You know, when they're in their bedroom, no longer surrounded by sounds, we are really going to need to rely on sensation, on teaching sensation to develop singing. And that could be something like, let's say we're doing a T, and we'll go t, and we'll all sort of do this t gesture at the same time. Apart from, of course, the latency that we experience, we can see that folks are doing that gesture and coordinate something like that together. And of course, to shape the repertoire. For example, I'll go back to my articulation example. Could be something that we want to have a sense of bouncing energy in the music, or maybe a sense of connection, of resistance in the sound. All of these ways to sort of do this in a concrete and tactile fashion, I think will really help us in the online environment. Well, my last topic for us, what about us? What about conductors? And I think this embodiment notion applies to us greatly. Jacques Dalcroze called the conductor the archetypal eurythmician, the person who is most able or best able to demonstrate the sound-gesture relationship and how these two things are absolutely synonymous or can be synonymous. So here's one principle I want to invite us to consider, and that is experience before analysis. And we hear this in other domains. We hear sound before symbol. And that's a well-known principle in music education, and it applies here with the conductor's study of the score. And this might seem revolutionary in a certain way, but I invite you in your own study of the music as you prepare to conduct, and now's a great time as we're learning all this music for the fall, to simply listen to the music. Take away the score, just listen to the music and respond in movement. Just sort of close your eyes and hear the music and allow it to move your body and see and feel how it goes for yourself. What impressions does this generate for you? How do you feel? What emotions, as well as what sensations, does an experience like this awaken for you? So I've chosen a recording for us here. Maybe we'll play a minute of it here and take a listen. This is Vittoria's Amicus Meus from the Tenebrae Responsories, a beautiful and peaceful piece of music. So I'll share it with you, and let's take a listen for maybe a minute. And I just invite you to close your eyes and move your body and see what happens. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, there we go. Great. Hope you can hear this. And I'll pause it there for us and go back to my PowerPoint. Here's the score for you two. And after we would experience something like that, you know, listening and moving, we could then look at the score, and it would be a sort of investigation in a way, and be like, oh, I felt that when the basses entered, or I felt this when the sopranos got to the peak of that phrase. And that way we're comparing our experience with the score, not allowing the score to dictate how we should feel or the score to necessarily tell us, but rather to integrate our personal movement experience with the printed score. And Dalcroze believed that printed notation, it's great, but it doesn't capture the essence, the movement of the sounds through time. So something for you to try. And then we can think about conducting from the perspective of movement vocabulary. And I'd like to ask you the question, I ask myself this too, how closely does your gesture mimic the movement in the music? So we think about music having movement and motion, conducting having movement and motion. How closely related are those two things? So here's my little example. What if we had a forte quarter note followed by a piano quarter note? And the little arrow there represents how your preparatory beat for the piano would be very small. So something like this, ta, ta. And the gesture would change in its timing and its space and its energy to reflect the piano sound. This is just a very small example, but I think this is a challenge to us as conductors, to not so much think about how we apply gestures to music, but how the music dictates for us what our gesture should do. And that helps to bring it to life. The other thing I'll say about gestures is that we can use the gestures we develop in rehearsal for our performance conducting. And so it's really important that we always ask students, or we invite students to do gestures with us, and not just say, sing it like this, but say, let's try a gesture together and to sing while moving, so that singers have a firsthand experience. Later, we can adopt that same gesture into our conducting in whatever adaptation we might use. You know, it could be something in your left hand, for example, to show phrasing. And in that way, it cues for the singer, oh, I felt that. She's doing this gesture. I remember feeling that. I know how that sounds. And so we are then becoming a reflection of the movement that other people have felt. And that's, you know, isn't that our job, to be a conduit for sound as conductors? So these are some ideas about how to use Dalcroze eurythmics specifically to have an embodied rehearsal, an embodied score study. I'm going to go to questions now. We've gotten through this quickly, which is great, but I'm very much hoping that you've got a few questions that you'd like to share in the chat, and we can, that will inspire some of our conversation as we move forward. Let me stop my share here. Great, thank you. No problem.
I have a quick question as, oh, I know that Max just put one in here that was online too, but to help us get this conversation going too, what are some of your recommendations for adapting for, especially for our youngest singers that might not really understand even an ictus, or that sense of beat, I should say sense of beat.
Do you mean adapting our conducting?
Either conducting or the movement that the students would do. And I meant to say beat versus ictus. I like the word ictus.
Well, yeah, I mean, in a certain way, working with, I used to teach school, and in a certain way, working with young children is the most joyous experience when it comes to movement, because in many ways, they're ready to move. They want to move, and it's natural for them to do that. And so I have found that using movement is very easy. In fact, you almost have to contain the energy that comes surrounding movement and really layer it little by little, and maybe don't start with something like let's step the pulse around the room, because that of course could invite a lot of energy, but tapping the pulse here, absolutely. And if you want to start even before that, it could just be a free motion like woo, or something like that, just something that is kind of painting the sound, or a freer kind of a gesture, or giving your sound to someone else, or, you know, things that are not as specific musically. But even young children, of course, you know, you could do, this is forte, this is piano, you know, some kind of embodiment of the dynamic. They would love to do something like that. So I think it's absolutely adaptable to that age group.
And sort of almost along that line as well, you know, and this is what I sort of typed in, but how do you think we can sort of make our students in this new world sort of feel comfortable moving in their own homes? You know, for many, I noticed this spring that for some, it was a relief. Some kids did more than they had ever done before. And some students felt uncomfortable being in their room alone. And so you spoke earlier about sort of creating a wonderful environment. I know it's early in this thing and this is new to all of us, but sort of what are your instincts telling you about sort of creating a comfortable space?
Yeah, and I think we need to carefully consider that as we go into this fall, because our students are potentially rehearsing in a brand new way. Of course, we're teaching in a brand new way, but they're rehearsing in a brand new way. I really think those icebreakers, those little movement icebreakers, would help you to set up the conditions where you could use movement in a musical context. So it could be something, you know, giving something like, what's your favorite color? You know, is it red, blue, yellow, or green? I don't know, something like that. And having the answer be a nonverbal answer, because we will need to rely more strongly on nonverbal teaching in an online context. Something like that. I'm sure people are going to come up with all kinds of creative games here, but maybe doing it in the icebreaker phase is a way to break through the screen in a certain way, right? I also think we need to be very connected to our students. I just came further forward here because we need to be really close and connected, right? So it's like, hi, I'm here, I'm excited, I'm with you, you know, as opposed to necessarily being, you know, out here. There's a proximity factor that's important for us too. And then I think we invite students even more. I heard recently, you know, perhaps if a student is more introverted, it's better for them to be on speaker view on Zoom. Perhaps if a student's more extroverted, it's better to be on gallery view. So how do they feel most comfortable viewing the experience is important too. And then maybe if you want to try something like we did, listening and responding to music, people turn their video off altogether. And so I think we have some cool options in Zoom for how we do this as well. But I must just say that it takes time, and we develop a vocabulary of movement. My students, over 5 years of working with them at Duquesne, are just like, how are we going to move next? You know, they're used to it.
Yeah. And another question we have from the YouTube chat is, how do we help our elementary singers who do not have a sense of pulse, who cannot seem to step or move with the beat? How do we help them develop that?
Yeah, it's interesting because Jacques Dalcroze developed his stuff first through walking. And he was working with collegiate level students, but he noticed that a person who maybe was having more difficulty being accurate while playing the piano, for example, had no problem, you know, keeping a beat while walking. And we think about walking as this natural alteration of left and right and left and right. So I think using music, if you're using recorded music, you know, with a really strong and convincing pulse can be a wonderful way, and then stepping to it. And it's totally fine if a student doesn't step to the beat. That's okay. You know, these things are developed, that coordination is developed over time, or maybe something like climbing a ladder, you know, but something that has an alteration of left and right and left is a really big gross motor way to explore. That is a nice way to develop pulse.
Fantastic. You know, one sort of in the weeds question, sort of for me was I loved how you used Victoria as the musical example, because I find that, you know, when we look at a modern edition of, say, Victoria, which is in notation that, you know, he wouldn't have written the piece in, and very different, you know, if we were to just look at that piece first on paper, we would do something probably kind of boxy and in 4. And then suddenly when you listen to it, suddenly you start to do all these interesting things. So my question is, you know, when we're teaching that piece, and let's say we're teaching a piece to an amateur choir or younger students, which you have great Renaissance music that all ages can do, you know, how do you judge that gap? So when you're in rehearsal, you know, and you have to keep them in line as they're learning, you know, when do you start to bring in sort of maybe that more authentic is not the right word, but that sort of more in line with the music gesture? Do you do it right from the beginning? You know, how do you make that balance?
Well, that's a very good question. And in Renaissance music, it's a big question because we know the independent lines need to have shape and life and independence, right, from one another. I think in approaching polyphony, it's really important to teach a single line, to have everybody shaping and feeling a line together, as opposed to trying to stack all these moving blocks, right? But pulse is going to be very important. And Jacques Dalacroze talked about metric rhythm and plastic rhythm. And so metric rhythm is about keeping the pulse, or about organizing the pulse. And he developed these large arm beats, which I'll try to show you here, these giant conducting arm beats that are used in a Dalacroze class. That's a 3/4 pattern, 1, 2, 3, 1. And it's like our 3/4 pattern, right? Except it's a giant version. So perhaps it's about exploring metric rhythm first, so that we really have a sense of like what is the groundwork for this? And then plasticity or plastic rhythm is, what is the shaping of this? And Max, I think we need to explore both of those, but doing so with a single line in polyphony can be really helpful as we try to layer all of that. And then your question about imposing a 4/4. I think my goal, maybe your goal too, is eventually, you know, the conductor reminds, the conductor nudges, the conductor invites, but the conductor does not direct traffic. Because at that point in time, we've given the rhythm over to students. They've embodied it, they've felt it, they have it. And we're there to kind of cohere or to invite or to imagine at that point in time. So I think that's my ideal outcome.
Oh, thank you so much for that. It is such a wonderful reminder. And sort of with that, we just want to thank Caron Daley so much for being with us this sort of afternoon. I guess it's almost evening at this point, and just sort of reminding us and inspiring us as we go into this year. There is an email for you, and we'll make sure that is in the description of this email if folks have any other questions to reach out. But again, thank you so much for being with us today. It was fantastic.
Absolutely. This is a lot of fun.
So
good luck, everyone, as you approach your fall.
Good luck to you too. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming.